You're about to listen to a BBC podcast, and trust me, you'll get there in a moment. But if you're a comedy fan, I'd really like to tell you a bit about what we do. I'm Julia Mackenzie, and I commission comedy podcasts at the BBC. It's a bit of a dream job, really. Comedy is a fantastic, joyous thing to do because really you're making people laugh, making people's days a bit better, helping them process all manner of things. But, I also know that comedy is really subjective and everyone has different tastes. So we've got a huge range of comedy on offer, from satire to silly, shocking to soothing, profound to just general prattling about. So if you fancy a laugh, find your next comedy at BBC Sounds.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Not bothered. Don't even know who else is in pot 3, who else is in pot 2. I don't know. But I'm sure I'll find out when I get to Hamburg.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast, your bite-sized daily dose of news, analysis and gossip. It's Wednesday the 22nd of November. I'm Alasdair Lamont, and coming up today...
Pot 3 looks infinitely stronger than Pot 2, doesn't it?
It is, yeah. I think it is. Let's all get carried away, yeah.
Dream draws or the group of death. We take a look at who Scotland could get at Euro 2024 and assess the best and worst case scenarios. Also...
Turnbull, the edge of the box, what a finish that is! Bottom left corner!
Should that man be on the plane to Germany? We discuss the wildcard picks who could yet make a late push for Steve Clarke's squad. And
in fact, I love Scotland. I've always wanted to manage in Scotland.
How would you like to see legendary English manager Neil Warnock taking charge at your club?
This is the Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Without further ado, let me introduce today's guests. Joining me to wallow further in Scotland's Euro 2024 glory, our comedian and off-the-ball stalwart Ray Bradshaw. Ray, how are you today?
Very well, mate.
Good show. And BBC Scotland's very own sports presenter, Lewis Irons. Are you well, Lewis?
I'm very well, Al. I've got my Scotland shirt on for this one, so I'm ready to go.
Excellent stuff. Well, lots more to come from Ray and Lewis, but first let's round up all the Scottish football news in less than a minute. There were a couple of games in League 2 last night. Managerless Elgin City beat Forfar 1-0 at Borough Briggs to move 5 points clear of bottom place Clyde, while Bonnyrigg Rose overcame East Fife 4-2 to get their first league win in 4 attempts. Ben Doak missed a late penalty as Scotland under-21s were held to a 0-0 draw by Hungary in Budapest. The result means they stay second in Group B, 3 points behind Spain. Sticking with the national young teams, the under-19s finished their Euro qualifying round in style, beating Serbia 2-1 to top their group and progress to the elite stage in March. And with the January transfer window looming into view, Kevin Van Veen has revealed he's keen to return to Scotland. Speaking to The Sun, the former Motherwell star has admitted his move to Groningen hasn't worked out the way he would have liked. Well, first up today, the European Championship qualification group matches drew to a close last night, so we now know the makeup of most of the teams who will be at Euro 2024, with the exception of 3 who will be decided by the playoffs in March. So, what are the best and worst case scenarios for Scotland? Briefly, Pot 1, Germany, Portugal, France, Spain, Belgium and England. Pot 2, Hungary, Turkey, Romania, Denmark, Albania and Austria. We're in Pot 3 with Netherlands, Croatia, Slovenia, Slovakia and Czechia. I'm going to keep using Czechia until it catches on. And then Pot 4 currently contains Italy, Serbia and Switzerland. The number crunchers reckon Greece, Ukraine and Poland have the highest percentage chance of going through the playoffs. So for this exercise, let's assume they also qualify. So, Ray, give me your dream group first of all.
Dream group. My main concern is the number crunchers. I know they've said they're not going to qualify, but I saw Israel have a 22% chance of qualifying. So we're going to end up playing them again for what is the 15th time in about 2 years. But dream draw, I can't decide if I want Germany or not because their form is rank. But playing the home team, it'd be quite a good atmosphere, but we've done that before and it's not come. So I think my dream draw would probably be, let's go for Germany, Albania, Scotland and Greece. I think Greece work out as the lowest ranked team potentially available. So go for that. But I'm taking Steve's Clarke view that whoever we're going to get, we're going to absolutely wallop anyway. So we're going to win the thing, so it doesn't matter too much.
Admire that optimism. Lewis, have you got a more realistic view of things, perhaps?
Slightly, Al. I do agree with Ray, though, that you've got to go in with belief and confidence. I went with Germany as well from pot one. I think playing the host would be just a special atmosphere. It would be brilliant in Germany. With 5 million Scottish people travelling, I think Steve Clarke himself said. So what an atmosphere that would be. And as Ray also touched on, their form is minging at the moment. But when they're on home soil, when they're in major tournaments, they tend to turn up, don't they? So I think you can look at pot one and think that whoever we get from there is probably going to top the group, let's be honest. The strength in there is unbelievable no matter who you get. So Germany would just be more of an interesting one. From pot two, I went with Romania. I just think that Albania maybe had a bit of a tougher qualifying group. And when you look at Albania's squad, I thought it was just a little bit stronger on paper. So it was a toss-up between them and Romania. So I've went for Romania, both teams who topped their groups, and probably, admittedly, people don't really know much about either team, really, if we're being honest.
Lewis, that's why we've picked them, mate. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And then from pot four, I wasn't sure about the process in terms of if we were going to commit to those three teams that haven't yet qualified. So I was looking at Italy, Serbia and Switzerland as the only guaranteed ones. Obviously, I'd take Greece. But I went with Serbia because you don't want Italy, obviously, and you don't want Switzerland, in my opinion. So I went with Serbia, but obviously if Greece are going to be there, they're the weakest on paper in pot four for me. But watch them turn up and win the thing like they did years ago. Was it 04 they won it? So,
yeah, well, for what it's worth, I've gone for Germany for basically the reasons you say. Haven't been playing competitively, but when they have played, it's been really, well, you guys have been slightly more negative. I went for indifferent results. But Albania as well, I've gone for, historically, I would say they're the weakest of that group, and I'm also clinging on to the memory of beating them 4-0 a few years back, although that's clearly quite outdated. And I've gone for Poland out of that pot four, mainly because they had the poorest qualifying record, and I noticed they drew and lost against Moldova. So we shall see. What about the nightmare group then, Ray?
Any of the other teams, to be honest. Let's be honest. I think I really don't want to play England, which I think, because I thought when we did it in Euro 2021, a lot of our energy went into that game. And then I was at Hampden a couple of months ago, just watching Jude Bellingham just ran the show. Harry Maguire scoring an OG was generally one of the highlights of my year, I have to be honest. But the whole kind of thing. So I think definitely them. It's one of those things I was looking at it. Denmark are the highest ranked pot two team. But last time we played them, that 2-0 victory at Hampden was incredible. John Suter scored. The atmosphere, we played them off the park. So they'd already qualified then. So it's whether that makes a difference. So I think probably England, Denmark, Scotland and Italy, because you guys touched on there, the reigning European champions. I mean, they didn't qualify for the last World Cup, and you never know what Italy team you're getting. But for the reigning champions to be in pot four, I wonder if that's the first time that's happened, because usually the reigning champions would qualify automatically into the first seeds and stuff like that. So it'd be absolute classic Scotland, wouldn't it, to get the reigning champions. So I think England, Denmark, Scotland, Italy, not the best, is it?
Lewis?
Similar to Ray, but I actually went with France from pot one. I was weighing it up, kind of like you mentioned, Ray. The thought of just playing England again was a bit of a negative. I just feels like we hadn't played them for so long, and then it just feels like we're playing them so often at the moment. Obviously, we got them in the last Euros. It does sap the energy. I just thought that we probably have a better chance of getting another point, or I don't know, win is all a lot of people describe it as, against them compared to France. I just think France will just be able to batter anybody. They are the strongest team in the competition, aren't they? Let's be honest, on paper, them and England probably. So I went with France just to kind of mix it up, because there's not the same motivation to play them as there is with England. From pot two, similar, I went with Denmark. I looked at Turkey for a while. They're obviously they're strong, but Denmark have just an abundance of quality, don't they, in terms of their personnel. And then pot four, I mean, there's no one else other than Italy that you're picking there. They're just not a pot four team at all, are they? Like, I actually think Italy have the potential to top any group that they go into. Like, they could on their day beat any of those pot one teams. You just at the moment are just going through such a transition, but on paper and in major tournaments, and obviously they're the holders. They've just got it in them to to top a group.
Kind of feels like Italy are always going through a transition, doesn't it? Like, when was the last time they were stable? I can't remember that.
I know.
No, absolutely, but they'll. I agree, Lewis. They'll be a threat to anyone, regardless. So I'm very similar, actually. I've gone England partly because they've got a great squad, partly because we've played them so often lately. Denmark as well. But in saying that, I would fancy our chances against anyone in pot 2. I think that's worked out pretty well. I know there was a lot of kind of discussion about whether it's better to be in pot 2 and 3. And I definitely think we've kind of lucked out in that regard. And Italy absolutely from pot 4 just because they're Italy.
You're listening to the Scottish Football Podcast.
Well, the other big unknown ahead of next summer is who will be on the plane to Germany. Most of the Scotland squad picks itself these days, but there are still a few places up for grabs. So who could be the wild card picks for Steve Clarke? Right, I'm going to go first. Presenter's dibs. So the 2 players I think might yet be in with a shout are Ross Stewart and Ben Doak. So let me just explain my rationale. I know Ben Doak's a bit of a lazy shout. I'm really just jumping on a bandwagon here because I haven't actually seen all that much of him, if I'm honest. However, he's obviously making great strides at Liverpool, and I don't think Jurgen Klopp's someone who's easily impressed. He's had a couple of starts in the Europa League and a couple of other appearances, but realistically, I think he's going to have to be more involved in the second half of the season to have a chance. But he does seem to be an exciting player. As for Ross Stewart, he's probably another long shot, but it will be interesting to see how he performs at Southampton now he's back fit after that long injury layoff. If, for example, I'm thinking he massively outscores Lyndon Dykes in the Championship in the second half of the season, it's not inconceivable you could beat him to a place on the plane, albeit I do think Dykes has been terrific for Scotland. Lewis, what about you? Who would you like to make a case for?
Well, after you took presenter's dibs, Alan, and picked those 2, I was looking at Ross Stewart initially myself. I didn't pick Ben Doak just out of the kind of rationale that you said. He's just not played enough. No matter how good he is and the fact he's 17, Clark's not going to ignore the fact he's not played enough football, is he, to take him as it stands. So he needs to do a lot in the second half of the season to be involved. So the 2 I went for, kind of interesting shit. I went with David Turnbull. He's been around the squads before. I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe wriggle his way into the squad. Brendan Rodgers seems to like him. There's an injury to Hatate at the moment that might present a bit more of an opportunity for him. And I mean, he's top scorer with Matt O'Reilly, isn't he, in terms of, and he's played like half the minutes. So he's shown he's got something, and he could have a big second half of the season, couldn't he, for Celtic? So I think it wouldn't be surprising to see him push for a place. And then I've went for a kind of left field shout for my second one. Steve Clarke is capable of producing like a bit of a marquee signing, isn't he? Like in terms of dipping into pool that are eligible for Scotland. And it wouldn't surprise me if he did it again after the success we've seen with Dykes, Adams and Gunn, for example. So I went with Harvey Barnes. There's a few options out there, a lot of them in a Newcastle shirt, the likes of Tino Livramento, Anthony Gordon and Elliot Anderson. I ruled Anderson out off the back of his call up and dropping back out the squad. It might just be a bit messy for him to come back into the frame. But with Barnes, he's a wee bit off an England place, isn't he? And he's just coming back from an injury. He could have a big second half to the season. And it is a position that we're generally quite weak in, aren't we? We don't have a lot of depth, and it might be the next evolution of Clark's team to kind of have more natural wingers in the squad. So I thought Harvey Barnes could be a shout, and he has reportedly expressed a bit of interest, I think, at maybe getting involved, whether that's concrete or not.
He does seem like a slightly more realistic convert, if you like, than like Anthony Gordon, for instance, who you would imagine is not that far away from the full England squad. Ray, who are you going for yourself?
Right, I've gone a little bit out of it because I think Ben Doak is the new Ryan Gold shout. I think we need to ignore John Carver's 4 Newcastle contacts because that's all we're trying to recruit. I've gone for 2 guys. Bear in mind that you've already named 4 of the most likely ones. I've gone for 2 guys.
2 guys Turkish.
2 guys. Imagine I was just like George Albert's 2 guys. Just go for a Rangers 2001 midfield. I've gone for 2 players, Al, that have a combined 1 appearance in this qualification between them. The first one, I think, is got more of a chance than the second one. John Souttar I think there is a chance there. When we go back, we talked about it earlier, the Denmark game, he was unreal in that game. And people forget as well, we played Israel, we lost 2-1. That was at 2018, 2019. He was carrying an injury and he still played. He got sent off and then he missed 3 months for his club after that. So it's a guy who loves the national team. And I think of all the places, midfield I've tried to avoid because that seems the most set. Keepers is another issue because we're not really sure what's going to happen with Craig Gordon. So I've tried to go for a defender and attacker. So with guys like Liam Cooper, Grant Hanley, you'd imagine they'll be picked, but they're not automatic picks. So I think Suter is a good 6 months for Rangers, and I think there's a pretty strong chance he will be in there. The other one, I'm keen to see both your faces when I say this. I still think there's a small chance that Ollie McBurney might get called up. Interesting faces from both of you. I think when you look at, both of you kind of touched on it, when you look at a striker situation, I think there's one place up for grabs, really, because Clark likes to use Christie. He's always named as one of his attackers. So it'll be Christie, Adams, Dykes, and one else. Shankland, Jacob Brown. You could see Shankland isn't that fancied. You could see that in the game on Sunday night by the fact he only got, 5 minutes, and it was only when they scored. And then when you have someone like Ollie McBurney, now I'm not saying I want him in the squad, but what I'm saying is if you've got a player in the Premier League scoring 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 goals, when you've got guys like Stewart, Adams, Dykes, maybe not getting that in the Championship, I think that is the argument. Whether Clark wants him, he's not played since he pulled out the Euro 2020 squad injured. So, I think it's going to be an interesting one. But I think there's a small chance he might do it. How would you feel about it?
Yeah. For one thing for sure is that McBurney, I was fortunate enough to be around the squad for a couple of years and hugely popular figure around the place. Like he brings a lot off the pitch as well, which I do think Clark takes into contention at points, into consideration, at points. So, and you can't forget, like, yes, he gets a lot of stick, but that man stepped up when it mattered in Serbia to fire in a penalty. And he always wants to turn up for his country as well. So he maybe has his issues sometimes off the pitch, but if he plays well enough on it, I think his character and personality is not a problem in terms of around the squad because he fits in really well when he's around the place. Big time. And
he's got the perfect goal scoring record for our Scotland team just now with 0 and 19, which kind of sums up our strikers in the last wee while. So he'll fit right in.
This is the Scottish Football Podcast.
Finally, just quickly wanted to get your thoughts on this.
In fact, I love Scotland. I've always wanted to manage in Scotland. I think I was close to Hearts once, and they gave it an idiot from Latvia. So they obviously didn't want.
Sorry,
they obviously didn't want me. I applied for the Aberdeen job once. I didn't even get a reply, which I thought was really bad manners.
So the legendary Neil Warnock has told our sister podcast, Sacked in the Morning, that he loves Scotland and has always wanted to manage here. Lewis, would you like to see him pitch up in Scottish football? And if so, which club could you see him at?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to see him out. It would be box office stuff, wouldn't it? You're going to be entertained, that's for sure. He's obviously a brilliant manager as well. Maybe the kind of humour around him can distract from how good a manager he's been over the years. Mm-hmm. But I would love to see him in Scotland. I think he'd be great value, particularly for us in the media. We love a bit of that, don't we? But in terms of what club I'd love to see him at, it's a tough one. You'd have to rule out any club with a plastic pitch because he absolutely hates them, apparently. I've been told reliably. So certainly not going to end up at Livy or Kilmarnock or anything like that. I guess you have to look at teams that would maybe realistically look for a manager. Motherwell are struggling at the moment. I guess someone like even maybe Hearts, if fortunes turned a little bit there, would be interesting. But it would probably be one of the bottom 6 sides, if you like, on paper.
I think there's an actual answer to this because I'm pretty sure he's got a brick in the stand at Morton. Yeah. Dougie Emery not having the best time just now. Neil Warnock at Morton is box office, I think. Wow. Imagine him in the Norseman pub after a game, just sitting there, listening to everyone's tactics, offering them for fights. The Championship is always described as one of the oddest leagues in the world because it's so up and down. This year with Dundee United, it's slightly not. Chuck Neil Warnock in there and let's have a laugh.
That would be scenes, wouldn't it?
Sacked in the Morning with former Scotland gaffer Craig Levine and Amy Irons speaking to the inimitable Neil Warnock is available now wherever you get your podcasts. Definitely one not to be missed. Well, that's us for today. Thanks to Lewis and Ray, and thank you for listening. Remember, if you've got any comments or questions, send them into scottishfootball@bbc.co.uk, and you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. So if you haven't done so already, just search for the Scottish Football Podcast and hit subscribe. See you next time.
Just a quick word to say the Scotland Rugby Podcast is now available every Tuesday. Join me, Andy Burke and Tom English for everything you need to know about the world of Scottish rugby. Just head to BBC Sounds and subscribe to the Scotland Rugby Podcast.